Good evening and welcome to World View, the international affairs show that brings you the news and views that other networks can't or won't tell you about. I'm Alan Mendoza. Our show tonight, Europe and America, or Eurabia's appeasers and the aggressors of the new imperium. Justified perceptions or unwarranted hysteria. Once upon a time, Europeans and Americans were engaged in a love affair. In those halcyon days, Europe would admire the boldness, brashness and energy of America, while America would gaze in awe at the culture and refinement of Europeans. But those days are long gone. Open up a newspaper, pick up a book or surf the internet today, and you're more likely to be confronted with an entirely different set of images. Europe is increasingly seen in America as weak, morally decadent and in demographic decline. Some commentators have gone as far as to say that its failure to stand up for its cultural values and difficulty in integrating Muslim communities will eventually lead to its collapse into an entity labelled Eurabia. On the flip side, America is now seen in Europe as an ignorant and boorish bully, possessed by a religious fervour to throw its weight around internationally. Some have gone as far as to say that the USA is now the biggest threat to global peace. So how much truth are there to these stereotypes, and how have the respective European and American intelligentsias come to form them? And does it matter in the context of international relations that we seemingly hold each other in such contempt? And what are the implications of such attitudes for the future conduct of international policy? Well, joining me tonight in the Worldview studio to unpick this topic are the Director of the Centre for Social Cohesion, Douglas Murray, the Editor of the Liberal magazine, Benjamin Ram, and the Henry Jackson Society's cultural guru, Mark Sidwell. Well, gentlemen, thanks for joining me on this sort of more culturally focused worldview tonight. It's a big problem, obviously, this issue of the cultural stereotyping. I mean, Ben, let's start with you. How real are these perceptions at the moment? Is it true that Europeans and Americans do things this way, or is it just me exercising journalistic licence to say that?
Certainly there's a grain of truth to the stereotypes, but I think it's important to delineate between the cultures in a different manner than simply dividing them by continents.
Fine.
So it's crucial for us to say that the challenge we all face is between liberals and illiberals at home and abroad. And those illiberals may be seen in authoritarian big government in the Middle East. They may be seen in Bush's reactionary policies towards civil liberties in the United States. And it is crucial for liberals around the world to stand in solidarity with individuals on all three continents and to say that what divides us here is not geographical space, but the fight for tyranny and the challenge to a sort of cultural relativism, of which I'm sure Mark will address, that has infected large swathes of the Western intelligentsia.
Mark, do you buy that?
I'd certainly buy the cultural relativism part. I'm less happy, I think, with equating George Bush and Muslim Tehran or something like that, which there was a touch of there. I mean, I grant you there are issues about illiberal conservatives, particularly in some areas of America, but that's not to say that they can be put on the same plane as people
I'm not suggesting they are.
There was a touch of that there, and I just think it's important to be clear about that, at least. I just wanted to clarify that.
What's driving it for you then, Mark, in the sort of stereotyping? What's behind it all?
Well, I think actually it's been around longer than we like to think. I mean, I know the war has brought it out and made it very obvious, but for instance, recently I saw a rerun of the first edition of Spitting Image, and they did a sketch about Reagan. And you could have put a Bush puppet through the same sketch, and it would have been identical. It was all about the president's brain is missing, and he's such a fool, and you can shoot him, and you won't even notice, and things like that. So I don't think it's changed that much. And if you look, for example, at Philippe Roget's book last year or the year before about French anti-Americanism, he was showing the history of that going back over centuries, and so I think these things go deeper than we think. It's not just a recent phenomenon.
A fair point. Then, Douglas, is it more virulent nowadays then than 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 50 years ago?
What?
Anti-Americanism in Europe, anti-Europeanism in America?
Well, I mean, it's been talked up a lot, yeah. And there are people with an interest in talking it up. should be stated. Once, for instance, you've written a book saying Europe is in decline, you kind of have a vested interest in it declining, otherwise you'll prove to be an idiot at parties. And vice versa, if you keep on saying that America is the authoritarian Nazi state without parallel in human history, then you kind of have an interest in hoping that American civil liberties are further taken away, and that the hope that you'll be proved right in your fatuous thesis. But what I think is happening at the moment is we do have a few people on each side who have kind of blown the ground open a bit. I mean, back to yours, Eurabia is one example, Mark Stein's latest book, America Alone, and then all, of course, of the putrid effusions of Noam Chomsky and co. on the other side. So, you know, the ground's very open, and there's a lot of room in the middle now. And most people are there, but sadly, as always, the louder you shout, the more you get listened to, and the wackier your thesis, the more press you're going to get.
Well, yes, that's a very fair point.
I mean, just sort of following up on Douglas' point, with which I concur about, if you like, the Chomskyite left, which finds its articulation as easily on the European continent, certainly in France, and with the sort of John Pilger sympathisers in Britain, that one has to remember that many of the valueless judgments that are coming from supposedly, in inverted commas, progressives may be found stateside. And indeed, partially because of the power of the American intelligentsia, and also because of the greater sense that the American intelligentsia has influence in the public sphere. One always senses that British academe, particularly after the Thatcher years, resorted into an almost monastic state, whereas in America you still have, one still gets the sense that think tanks are hugely influential, that the cultural sense reflected by Chomskyism unites the European and American left quite easily.
Yes, I mean, you can look at it. I suppose, thinking about what you're saying, actually, I'm just trying to look at a distinction between sort of personality and politics-driven, though, sort of stereotyping. Mark, we were having a discussion before, and you raised the point that, say, if a different president was elected, and you made the point just about Reagan, but people weren't saying the same thing about Clinton in that sense. Is it personality-driven? Is it really Bush has provoked the ire? And Ben, of course, mentioned Bush's illiberalism earlier. Is it that has caused this stereotyping to explode again and to have these theses to be promoted? Or is it more a case of politics driving it?
Well, I think it might be the political parties do differ in this. I mean, very interestingly, just yesterday, Mitt Romney was making a speech in which he said and accused Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, and...
I like that, Hilton.
Hilton,
that's a good call.
We'll leave that one. And some of the other candidates of pushing America, wanting to pull America towards Europe. He was saying that as an insult.
It would be an insult. I mean, it is an insult. It would be a dreadful thing if America was pulled in any way towards Europe, in which, incidentally, I don't particularly include Britain. But it would be a dreadful thing. I mean, a lot of American commentators are right on this. I mean, as we know, I mean, Europe as a continent...
So there is some truth in this.
Yeah, I mean, Europe as a continent is typified currently by very second-rate politicians running it, on a strange consensus of the centre-left, which they don't seem to question at any point. They seem to regard the future as being an inevitable state in some sort of hinterland where one pays more and more taxes in order that they can distribute our money worse and worse. And there's no questioning of that. That's just what's going to happen. And we'll be safer and cuddlier and more secure and happier if this happens. It's a societal project. I mean, it can't be stressed enough that the other things that used to fill up these gaps, the church and so on, have in Europe seen a decline which isn't irreversible, but is undoubtedly there, and where the elites of Europe decide not to refer to our heritage and our past in their constitution. I mean, this is an important one, for instance, on the European Constitution. Yeah. You can write the American Constitution, you can carry the American Constitution, I know a lot of people who do, round in your pocket. If you tried to carry the EU Constitution around for any time, you'd break your back. This is a document of incredible fatuity, and it can't be stressed enough that America still is built on ideas and on dreams and on prospects, which you can see still, and I know it's a cliche, but you can see it in your recently arrived American immigrant who believes that tomorrow is going to be a better day than today, and that if they have one taxi car today, next month they might have two, and by 10 years from now they might have a chain. And you compare that with general perceptions, and all polling seems to bear this out in Europe. If you just ask polls in Europe, if you ask people in a poll in Europe whether they believe, for instance, that tomorrow is going to be a better day,